Hi, I'm Rhonda Buss, and I'm here to walk you through the process of making the Amy Butler Beautiful Belle handbag. It really is quite easy, just certain little things to pay attention to. The exterior panel of the bag, if you'll remember that we marked the little notches here, or not the notches, but we marked these little dots. Once you start sewing, and you'll see that I've already have done some sewing just for the sake of time, but the first thing that you'll do on your exterior panel is you'll sew in the gathering stitches across the top of that piece. And you want to stop and start the gathering stitches at the dot that is here on the pattern. So just in the event that you've never done a gathering stitch, what you want to do is on your machine, the largest stitch possible will be your gathering stitch. And you'll want to do 2 rows of gathering stitches. The seam allowances on this bag are a 1/2 inch. Different people feel different ways about it. I actually like to put my second row of gathering right on that stitch line and then sew right on that stitch line. Some people like for their second row of gathering stitches to be a little past that and then they pick it out. But here again, I can be kind of lazy and I like to have a little less work, and if I don't have to pick something out, I'd rather not. So I usually put that second row of stitching right on my stitch line. The other thing I do is I pull my threads on one end. I pull my threads to one side and I tie them off. This makes it so much easier. I don't have to put a pin here. I'm not worried that once I start pulling the threads that my gathering will go off the other side or that I'll pull my threads through. It just, again, it's a little trick that I found that just makes things easy for me. So we have our gathering stitches here, and a nice way to know with this bag exactly how much to pull those gathering stitches up. The lining is not gathered, so it's already in the shape, the finished shape that we want. So now we'll pull our gathering stitches, and I have my lining panel here as my guide. You can see why it's important that you use the largest stitch on your machine, because if the stitches were any smaller, it would be very difficult to pull this into place. Another little thing to think about as you're pulling your gathering stitches up is not to pull too hard on your thread, as you can break your thread. And I've done that more times than I would like to admit to. There's a lot of things that I tell people. It's never criticism, it's because I've done it myself. So I've pulled the gathering stitches up quite a bit. We'll check and see. They're not even yet, but we'll see about how much more I need. And you can see we're getting there. So I'll just pull a little bit more. And I'll also pull these so that I get them a little more to one side, so they're a little more evenly spaced on the back. Match this up. I'm just fine. Before we put the lining to this piece, you can see on this side that I've attached my handle. So now we'll go to the handle piece. It's difficult to see. My fabric, is a black linen, so I wanted to use a black interfacing just in the event that the white would bleed through a bit. So it's difficult to see, but there is black interfacing on the back side of this handle. It was sewn with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and it's important because you can see that this has a bit of a curve to it, and we want this to stay a nice smooth curve. So it's important that you clip it so that once it's turned, it'll still have that curve. So you can see I've put a pin here just to help me as I turn my handle. There are so many things on the market now for turning, and I find that some of the old-fashioned things work just fine. And there's nothing better than a little tray full of safety pins in your sewing studio. So I've pulled this through, and at this point it's a little bit wonky. So what we want to do is press it. Don't you wish everything in your studio was so handy and easy to come by? Depending on the fabric that you use, it doesn't need a whole lot of ironing to put this in place, to set the seam in place. So now our handle's nice and flat, and we'll go to the machine, and we're going to do an edge, not an actual edge stitch, but we'll stitch about 1/4 inch away from the edge of the handle on both sides. Remove the safety pin. Now we have the stitching on both sides of our handle. This helps to give stability to the handle. But if you'll notice, the handle has been folded in half, and this makes the bag very nice and easy to actually carry. What we want to do is find the center of this and place a pin at the center, and then 2 inches on either side, so 4 inches in total. We'll place a pin. Fold this in half. Take it back to the machine. And stitch right on the line that we sewed before. And now our handle is ready to go. If you'll notice on this bag too, it's important to remember that the points don't go like this, they go like this. And the handles are matched up where our dots were, at this point it looks a little bit awkward, but once it's turned, it'll look right. So we'll stitch those in place. The next step, after you've sewn the handle, now we're going to go to our lining piece and sewing the pockets. This piece I've already sewn the pockets to the lining. And if you'll notice here, my little dots are in place. Those will come into use later. And depending on what you're going to use your bag for, this is a great bag. When I made the first bag, a friend of mine had just had a baby, and I realized that nobody really wants to walk around with a great big diaper bag anymore, and you want to look like a nice chic mother. So wouldn't it be nice to be able to have pockets that would carry a few diapers and maybe even a bottle, especially if you're going out for just a little bit of time. Or say maybe you go to work, and after work you like to go to a yoga class, so you want to take a change of clothes with you for that, maybe a pair of flip-flops. So you have these nice panels that you can customize for whatever will work for your lifestyle and what you're doing. So the pattern, it gives you a guideline of just having two big pockets on either side, but you can really do whatever you want. So the first thing that you need to do in order to create your panels, your pocket panels, is you'll put the two together, right sides together. We're going to sew them with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I don't like to get up and press all that often, so I can be a little bit lazy about things. And what I like to do once I've sewn, when I'm going to have something like this, rather than get up and have to iron my seam, I actually open up my two pieces with the seam allowance to one side, and then I do an edge stitch. The edge stitch is in place. I don't break my thread. I fold it back again because I want to have top stitching along the edge of the piece. So I just fold it back. And that little bit of an edge stitch that we did, it keeps you from having to get up and iron it. So the first row of top, I like to do 2 rows of top stitching. Not that it's really necessary, but it's a nice little decorative touch. So the first row is basically just another edge stitch. And I'll turn it once again. So I have my two rows of top stitching done. I didn't have to get up and press anything during the process. Now I can take my lining piece and match this up. Before we put the pocket panel on, what we need to do is decide where we would like our cell phone pocket to be. Now this is totally up to you. The pattern does give a designated area for it, but this is about making life easy and comfortable for you, so you choose where you would like it and place it on that point. Then remove the pocket panel, pin this in place. By the way, these are not the pins that I typically use. They're awfully large, but they're here right now. So with the cell phone pocket, the pattern does give directions for giving a little bit of space in the pocket, but for my personal use, I found that I wanted my cell phone to be nice and tight in that pocket, so I just laid the pocket completely flat and stitched it around. So my cell phone pocket is in place. Now it's time to decide how many pockets you would like to have. And a 2-inch ruler is, in my opinion, one of my most important tools in my sewing room. So I use it all the time. So if you don't have one, get one. Just take your ruler and you can line up one of the inch marks and simply draw a line. And I think that's plenty. We'll just pin this in place to secure it. Okay, we've sewn our pockets into place. I have not stitched this down yet. This will be done whenever we put the two pieces together. One thing that I did add to my bag that was not in the instructions is I added a little magnetic clasp, just because it does give a little extra security to the bag. They're very easy to put in. They come with a little backing piece. Find the center of your bag and mark this. Here's where you have to be super careful so that you don't cut too much. Just make a little snip. We've already interfaced the back, so that's really enough. Just slide the magnetic piece in, slide this on the back, push this to either side, and you're done. And then for the other side, you'll just match that up and put the other piece on the other side. So now what we need to do is sew the two lining pieces together. But one of the things that we need to remember is we need to leave an opening, because once we put this into our bag, we want to be able to flip everything out. So our first step then is to pin this a little bit. And I'm just going to, my dots have worn off a bit. I'm going to put them back. So we'll sew from the dot to about the middle, leave about a 4-inch opening, start again, and sew to this dot on the opposite side. When you're sewing over multiple layers, it can be rather intimidating, but just don't worry, keep going. It'll be just fine. I'm going to leave my 4-inch opening now. So my lining pieces have been sewn together. I have a nice little opening down here that I can get my hand through, and then I'll be able to pull everything through. My handles are all attached. I want those down. And remove the pin. I'm going to place the bag on the inside with right sides matching. I always think this is the best part because we're in the final stretch. Won't be long, and we'll actually be able to use the bag. Place some pins in the corner. Now we're going to sew, if you remember, there was a dot here and a dot here. We're going to sew from that dot to the next dot, across the top of the bag and down over to this dot, and then down to this dot here. And we'll do that on both sides of the bag. Remove my pin. Sew to the dot, turn it. And as you can see, I'm stitching right over that second line of gathering stitches that I talked about before. Then I won't have to pick them out. So I've sewed just to that dot on this side, and you would do that for the other side.